All right, let's start here with SVT in the second row.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. The Swedish Foreign Minister, good afternoon. The Swedish Foreign Minister had hoped that this meeting in Helsingborg would mark a new start for the alliance after a very turbulent period. How do you see it turning out? And if yes, what was key?
Well, a new start, I don't know. I would phrase it a little bit different. I think it was a very good meeting. It was a very good meeting where we really were coming together again. And this is a democratic alliance. You will always have debates in NATO. You've seen this. And when you look at NATO now compared to NATO only 1 or 2 years ago, the difference is huge. The spending has gone up, industrial production, the support for Ukraine, the transatlantic bond. I think all of this is in so much better shape than only a couple of years ago. So the NATO is stronger, but today was important because there are always tensions you want to discuss, and of course we have to make sure that the summit in Ankara really delivers, and I have every confidence.
Okay, just next to him.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You advocate for a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO. How long do you think the Europeans have to complete the shifting? And do you see it at the same time as killing two birds with one stone? A stronger NATO and also the Europeans able to protect themselves without the US should the occasion arise? Thank you.
We are not preparing for that last part of your question. So the assumption is, and this is exactly what the US wants, stay involved in NATO very strongly. But at the same time, also expecting the Europeans, one, to spend the same as they do when it comes to the overall spending on defense, Europeans and Canada equalizing with the US, but also for the Europeans to take a bigger responsibility for the defense of the European part of NATO, with the US long-term still here when it comes to the nuclear, but also when it comes to the conventional. Don't forget that the defense of the US mainland starts in Norway. And why does it start in Norway? Because these huge nuclear submarines from Russia, if they can pass Norway, can come too close to the American coast, would pose a direct threat to the United States. This is just one example that NATO is not only there to defend the European mainland, but also to defend the US mainland. So we are in this together. But I always felt that it is strange that a very rich part of the world, Europe is a very rich, maybe the richest part of the world, needs the support of another part of the world to defend itself against the Russians, to the extent it has now, where we are over-reliant on one ally being the United States. And what you will see over the coming years is a more equal, is a shift, a gradual shift, where the Europeans take this bigger responsibility, with the United States firmly anchored in the transatlantic relationship.
Okay, coming over here, fourth row.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Greta Karvala from Kauppalehti, Finland. I would like to ask, has Ukraine's growing defensive capability weakened Putin's position? What is analysis in NATO of this?
Well, clearly, Ukraine is putting up a strong defense. And when you look at the front line at the moment, it is stabilizing. There are even reports that Ukraine is in net terms regaining territory. Not massively, but at least it is stabilizing. And potentially even moving now in the right direction and not any longer in the wrong direction. So from the west to the east and not from the east to the west. And this is amazing, and this is what the Ukrainians are doing. And the Ukrainians have been incredible ingenious in terms of their ability to innovate, and this is one of the things we are learning all over NATO from Ukraine, for example, when it comes to the drone warfare and the anti-drone technologies. This is why we have JTEC, this joint organization in Poland, where we capture all the lessons from the war, so that we can figure them in the NATO plan. So I would not be too happy if I was Putin today, but I was never happy if I was Putin, but particularly not the last couple of weeks, because things are not going in the right direction.
All right, coming over here, second row.
Hi, Victor Jack from Politico. Thanks so much for the press conference. I just wanted to ask, are you inviting President Zelensky to the Ankara summit? And if so, have you sent out your invitation letter already? Thank you.
I never see those letters, to be honest, but I invited him already. Yes, I did. Yeah. He will be there, like in The Hague.
All right, in the third row here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. TRT World, Kubrakos from TRT World. Are allies today leaving Sweden more aligned than they were before this meeting? And if so, what would success look like for NATO in Ankara in that context as well? Turkey as the host nation, how Turkey's role is evolving in your view?
Yes, I think we are more aligned today than before today, because you always have discussions, and then when you come together in a ministerial meeting like this one, it always helps to align positions and then to come out and to say, hey, in the end, we all have the same goal, and let's work towards that. And I think Turkey will put up an incredible show in Ankara. It will be a splash. Very much focusing on the success of the increased defense spending, but also charting this credible path towards the 5%. When it comes to the defense industrial, I'm absolutely convinced that we will see huge progress. We are not there yet, not on the US side, not on the European side of NATO. We need to produce more, but clearly also the defense industrial base is now making that mindset shift, which is so necessary. And of course here Turkey with over 3,000 companies is extremely important, and also a great example of how to organize a defense industrial base.
Second row on this side.
Good afternoon, Secretary General. Malin from Dagens Industri here in Sweden. You said before the meeting that you want the allies to share the burden of supporting Ukraine more evenly. Did you achieve any concrete results on that during today's meeting?
I got a lot of encouraging comments on this. Of course, now we have to see whether they deliver. And I will do everything to make them deliver. But I must say that this was absolutely understood in the room, and all the comments made were very encouraging.
And just next to her.
Therese Larsson-Hultin from Swedish Svenska Dagbladet. Has there been any news presented from Marco Rubio in terms of American drawdowns? You talked yesterday about you had some insight and that there might be something this week or early next week.
No, what is playing out now at the moment at the level of policy directors is US contribution to the NATO force model. So that is a process now ongoing, but hey, we prepared for this because we know that the US has to think, if you have multiple theater threats, how can we make sure that all the capabilities and all the key enablers are everywhere where we need them? And that means that, and this will inform us, whereas European allies and Canada, we have to focus even more than we are already doing in the future. Of course, this is highly classified because we don't want to make anyone any wiser. But this is a process in place. This is nothing new. Everybody knew this was happening, and it has nothing to do with the fact that the US wants to equalize the burden. It has to do with the fact that they cannot be everywhere at the same time.
All right, coming now to the front row here.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sanna Nygren. I'm wondering, you said earlier that you're not preparing for the withdrawal of USA from NATO. Have you got a promise from Trump or Rubio that it won't happen in the future? And I have also another question. Some Swedes are afraid of that our membership will make us a target in the case of war. Can you guarantee that any ally will not place any nuclear-armed plans or ships in Sweden?
The second question is a bit difficult for me to answer, in the sense that, of course, we have the nuclear umbrella, and we know that France and the UK are also nuclear powers within NATO. The UK fully participating in the NATO nuclear planning group, and France having its own nuclear capability outside NATO. But of course, we closely coordinate. But on your first question, I mean, this alliance is there to protect all of us. And as I gave this Norwegian example, why for the defense of the US mainland, a safe Europe, a secure Europe, but also a secure Arctic, by the way, and a secure Atlantic is crucial for the defense of the US mainland. So there's a direct interest. You have seen over the last weeks, and particularly the six weeks after the 28th of February, thousands of US flights taking off from European air bases based on bilateral commitments which were made over the years between the US and various nations in Europe. I mentioned the example of Romania, which had to scramble to get some of its legislation changed in a couple of days so that they could do what the US wanted them to do. This is, of course, also Europe as a platform of power projection for the United States, clearly visible in action in between the end of February and mid-April till the ceasefire. And I think that is also the reason why the US is in NATO. So there are so many reasons for all of us to be in NATO. And so each country has its own reasons, but in the end it's about the defense of the collective, and that an attack on one is an attack on all.
All right, fourth row.
Hello, thanks a lot. Max Delaney, AFP.
Hi.
Just coming back what you were saying on the force model, you seem to intimate, but you didn't specify. Can you confirm then that the US has told you that it's going to cut its contribution to the NATO force model, and therefore there'll be less US troops immediately at the disposal of Saka in case of a crisis? Thanks a lot.
I'm afraid it's much more complicated than that, but it has not to do with the fact that it has nothing to do with what happened over a couple of weeks ago when they announced the number of 5,000 with regard then to Germany. That's totally separate from it. But I cannot say too much because it is highly classified.
Okay. Second row, here on the aisle.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Aisha Mulasmal, VG Norway. So before Secretary of State Marco Rubio left for Helsingborg, his statements included deep disappointment with NATO allies and their failure to support U.S. efforts in Iran. Is he now leaving Helsingborg less disappointment? And were any hard commitments made from NATO allies beyond offering support for the bigger cause of no nuclear weapons in Iran? What are the specifics?
Well, the specifics you have seen over the last couple of weeks, the French-British initiative, the American initiative of freedom of navigation. Today, all allies were absolutely clear that freedom of navigation is a key principle. Indeed, that Iran cannot get its hands on a nuclear capability. This is a long-standing principle of NATO. As I said before, when I visited the White House early April, I also absolutely sensed the disappointment. It had to do with two things. One is that in some cases it took a bit of time before European countries were able to implement all the previous made commitments to using those bases in case of a US operation elsewhere where they would need those bases. And what you're seeing at the moment is that all over Europe, and this is from Portugal up to and including Germany and Italy and France, United Kingdom, and Greece, well, I'm not going to mention the whole list, Romania, Bulgaria and many others, that thousands of flights have been taking off over the course of the war against Iran. US flights all over Europe massively. So that was one disappointment, which I understand, but I was also, I think, early April to explain that massively Europeans are doing what they committed to, and this is not NATO, these are bilateral commitments, but still very important. Then when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, when it comes to the next phase, you see now quite massively Europeans hearing the message from the US and pre-positioning essential equipment, ships and uncrewed systems and all kinds of other important contributions to in that next phase when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. And this is acknowledged by the US. I'm not going to speak for Marco or how he leaves here. Of course, he could tell you yourself. I don't think that is my position, but I think clearly European allies heard the Americans.
Coming over to this side, fourth row.
Hi, Amanda Wollstad, Svensk Tidskrift. I wondered if you were inspired by the lovely view and discussed the shadow fleet and a stronger joint reaction to the activities at the coast.
Yeah, absolutely. And also last evening when we were hosted by their majesties, of course, we were also able to, with a beautiful view over the Sund, it's very inspiring. And Sweden has done some great stuff there, and I was able also to speak to some of the people working on that when I visited the Coast Guard here on Wednesday night and had dinner there with the Prime Minister and some of his senior team. So that was really very impressive. We discussed it today, absolutely. I recalled again the initiative by the French President, starting with the European Political Community meeting in Copenhagen in October, for the Europeans to be more forward-leaning in terms of trying to do everything to pose strategic dilemmas to the Russians when it comes to the Shadow Fleet. And already we're seeing, and I cannot give you too much information on this, but I can assure you that the Russians take note of this and that it is a big irritant to them. Including having for these ships to, making it much more difficult, let me phrase it like that, for Russia to keep that Shadow Fleet sailing. And we will constantly discuss how we can do more.
Okay, all the way in the back.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tom Watkins from the National, Middle East-based publication. You've outlined some generalities, but can you give us any specific asks from the US in terms of getting the Strait of Hormuz open? And are there any actions there still predicated on there being a durable ceasefire first? Thank you.
Again, these discussions are ongoing. You have seen, of course, the French and British initiative. This is not NATO. This is the two countries working together, which I think it was over 40 countries signing up to the declaration a couple of weeks ago. You see now quite massively, for example, when it comes to mine hunting or demining equipment being pre-positioned. This is something, of course, where Europe is strong at. The US is not that big when it comes to demining, but when it comes to Europe, there are a lot of assets, and a lot of those assets are now being pre-positioned. You know that the Charles de Gaulle is now close to theater. So the French are massively there. But of course, this is an ongoing discussion within that coalition where NATO listens in, but of course is not leading that. It's really led by the French and the Brits, and also by the Americans. The freedom of navigation construct, which is their call for arms. And what I'm saying here is that where there was disappointment, I really believe that Europeans have heard the message.
All right, first standing on the aisle.
Good afternoon, Jens Fransen, VRT.
Hey.
Goedemiddag.
Goedemiddag.
Quickly in English, but I'll translate in Dutch. Due to budget restraints, the Belgian government, for instance, says, contrary to what is promised in The Hague, we're not augmenting to 3.5%, but we are flatlining on 2%. What would you say to, for instance, a Belgian government? De Belgische overheid heeft beslist, wij blijven op 2% in de plaats van te stijgen naar 3,5%. Ja, wat zegt u dan tegen zo'n Belgische regering?
Well, let me first of all acknowledge, do you want me to do it in Dutch or in English? In Dutch. Laat me allereerst, sorry voor jullie, you can watch television, Flemish television and hear the translation. Laat me eerst zeggen dat ik onder de indruk ben wat België gedaan heeft. Want jullie moesten een gat dichten van ergens 1,4, 1,5% naar 2%. Ik zeg uit mijn hoofd 4,5 miljard erbij in defensieuitgaven in 2025. Dat is enorm. Ik kan me heel goed voorstellen dat België zegt even uitrusten, moeten dat geld ook uitgeven, moeten defensie industrial base ontwikkelen. Maar wat ik terughoor van Theo Franke en ook van Maxime, de minister van Buitenlandse Zaken van de premier, is dat er een absoluut commitment is aan de afspraken in Den Haag. Dat is dus inclusief de doelstelling om op een geloofwaardige wijze naar die 5% toe te groeien.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left. We'll go to the fifth row on the aisle here.
Thank you. Marilu Lucrezio, Rai, Italian Public Television. President Trump talked about reducing U.S. presence in Italy and Spain. In Italy, we have 13,000 American troops and different bases. Do you have any news about reducing in Italy?
Let me zoom out. And zooming out, what we are doing in Europe is taking more responsibility for the defense of the European part of NATO. This is also with the understanding that the US has, of course, also to take care of the Middle East, in the Pacific, also in our interest here in Europe. So over time, what you will see is in a structured way, step by step, the US pivoting more towards these other areas in the world. all of them closely connected, etc. So I cannot give you any specific numbers because, of course, this is in the end an American decision. But more generally speaking, I really want to commend the US for the fact that they do this in a structured approach, step by step, and with the common understanding that whilst the US will pivot more towards other theaters, that the overall deterrence and defense in Europe has to stay the same. Because we are facing the Russian threat. We all acknowledge this, and that means that it has to be done in a structured way. But because the fact that we spend so much more, we can have a stronger Europe and a stronger NATO, Europeans doing more, which is logical, because in the end, as I said yesterday, I mean, in Europe, including UK and Turkey, you have about 600 million people. We have to defend ourselves against a country with between 120 and 140 million people. We are the richest part of the world. We should be able to do that without over-reliance on another ally on the other side of the Atlantic with about 350 million people. And of course, because we spend so little over the years, it takes time to get there. But with all the extra money and gradually now the capabilities coming in, we can do more.
Okay. I'm sorry, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so very much for joining us.